to serve him, heavenly King of glory, chosen heir to witness for his name.
I guess to start my experiences on my mission, I need to start with my brother Gary. Gary was killed on his mission in May 1971 in Thailand. I won't go into details, but at his funeral, Joseph Porter, our bishop at the time, gave my brother's life history. And at the end, he said a prayer. In this prayer, he said that if the need arose, Gary would be there to help myself or my younger brother in the mission field if the need arose. At the time, I wondered how that could be, but I was to find out later. About 7 or 8 months later, I received a mission call. The day I received a mission call, my dad and I were over at our new house working, and my mom came up riding a bicycle because we had the car, and in the basket of the bike was a large white envelope. We sat in our car with my dad and I sitting in the front and my mom in the back. Before I opened up the envelope, I said, "Where do you think I'll go?" And my mom said, "I hope you don't go to England because the missions are so hard." Well, I opened up the letter dated November 23rd, 1971, and it said, "Dear Elder Willis, you are hereby called to be a missionary of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to labor in the England Southwest Mission." The picture you see here is a picture of me in front of the mission home in Salt Lake that I spent Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday at. I arrived in Bristol, England on January 22nd, 1972, about 1 year after my brother went into his mission field. I was thrilled and excited, enjoyed every minute of it. But I was in the mission field 1 year before I had baptized anyone. But the areas I was at in England, I was in Weymouth and Cardiff, Wales, Exmouth, Tiverton, Biddeford, Cheltenham, and then Bristol. It's kind of discouraging for a missionary to be in that kind of position. I know lots have, but I was getting awful discouraged. Not one person I had taught had joined the church, but still I enjoyed the work I was doing. One night, Elder Lighthall and I, my companion when I was in Exmouth, England, were tracting, and we knocked on a door, and a young girl came to the door. We asked her if her father was home, and she said no. We left her a Book of Mormon and said we'd return in a few days. When we came back, she saw us coming to the door, and she gave the book to her father to give back to us. He had never heard of the Mormons before, or the Book of Mormon, and was determined to give the book back to us. We wouldn't take it back, and finally we talked him into letting us in. As we were teaching him, before we even got to the second part of the first discussion, he stopped us and wanted to know when he could join, how he could join the church. Within the next 2 weeks, we taught him, and he was baptized. We found out that his wife had left him a few years earlier, and he lived there with his daughter. She didn't join the church at the time because of word of wisdom problems, but she knew it was true. Brother Glover was a real good member of the church and had strong testimony. He was baptized January 4th, 1973. A few weeks later, we tracked the Sharman family. They had missionaries in their home about 4 or 5 years before. The first time we taught them was a real experience. At the end, we all got down on our knees to pray. Everyone took their turn except the head of the house, Brother Sharman. He refused and afterwards left the room. Elder Lighthall and I thought that would be the last time we were to teach them, but Sister Sharman wanted us to come back. Her husband said it was okay, but he didn't want any more to do with it. We set up an appointment with them to come back in a couple of days. The next day we took permission card to them to have Brother Sharman sign so that we could continue to teach his wife and family. It sure hurt to have him sign that card. It looked like he thought his troubles were over. When we came back to teach Sister Sharman again, she was just going to let us in one more time and tell us not to come back again. She only wanted to let us in again so that we didn't feel bad, but apparently something I said or did made her decide to find out if the church was true. We came back the next day to see her, and she was a different person. She knew the church was true. She was baptized the following week. Brother Sharman refused to attend the baptism, and we thought there would be some trouble in the family. But when Sister Sharman got home, Brother Sharman was sitting on the couch crying. We had left Sister Sharman the temple issue of the ensign a few days before, and Brother Sharman had looked through it and read the article on temple marriage. When Sister Sharman came in, Brother Sharman looked up and said, "I guess this means we won't be together after this life." Brother Sharman would come to church once in a while with Sister Sharman, but not too often, and he wouldn't give permission for his two children to be baptized. Yet they wanted to, Louise 12 and John 9. Elder Lighthall and I were transferred up to Tiverton. Then Elder Lighthall was transferred, and Elder Bryson became my companion. At one point, we were at a district conference visiting with the Sharman family, who came with us, and President Madsen. And President Madsen had told Brother Sharman that before President Madsen was released from the mission field, that Brother Sharman would join the church. After I was transferred to Tiverton, something started to bother me, and I started feeling that there was something I was supposed to do. It bothered me enough that in an interview with President Madsen, I mentioned it to him, and of course he didn't know what I was talking about, but there was just something that was bothering me that was something I was supposed to do, and it was really strong, but I couldn't figure it out. A short time later, we were transferred to Biddeford, and then I was transferred to Cheltenham to be a district leader. The following Monday, my appendix ruptured about 7 o'clock in the morning. I was taken to the hospital about 11 a.m. and finally operated on about 6:30 p.m. The next morning I felt pretty good, but I guess I wasn't. The elders came in Tuesday morning and gave me a blessing, and then in the afternoon I was just laying in bed, and then President Madsen came up to see me on Tuesday, and then on Wednesday I was laying in bed and I wasn't feeling very well, and I was just laying there with my eyes closed and resting, and all of a sudden I felt two hands on my head. At first I thought I couldn't figure out what the nurse was doing because they had the blood pressure cup and everything up above the head of the bed, and I thought she was leaning over to grab it and had just put her hand on my head. But when I opened my eyes, no one was there. I put my hand up to my head, and just before I touched it, the hands left. Then I realized what was happening. I was receiving a blessing from my brother. I knew who it was. So I lay back, and the hands came again for a few seconds and then left. I had heard no words, was left to ponder what had happened, and ponder I did. I was very sick at the time, and I wasn't getting any better. I didn't know whether the blessing I had received was for me to get well, or whether it was being called elsewhere. I lay pondering it all day, and I started getting worse. Then President Madsen came to see me, and I talked about it and told him how I felt and what had happened to me. He interviewed me quite extensively, wanted to make sure everything was okay. And after he left, I still didn't know whether I was going to live or die. Later that night, I had been doing a lot of praying and pondering, and I came to the conclusion that whatever the Lord wanted for me would be the best. If I was to die, that was fine, because I knew that I would be doing missionary work in the spirit world with my brother, and I began to get excited about it. What an experience to pass through, to go through to the spirit world. I couldn't think of a better time to die than in the service of the Lord. I began to really look forward to it. I could feel my spirit begin to slip away, and I felt as if I was going to die. I remember laying in bed and having a movement of raising my head like you do when you're going to sit up or get up. But I didn't move. The only thing I can think of was that was my spirit getting ready to leave my body. Then all of a sudden I thought, no, what would that do to your parents to lose two sons in the mission field? I had been promised when I was set apart as a missionary and when I went to the temple, and a blessing from my dad that I would return to my family. So I thought, no, you can't die. So at that moment I knew I was going to be okay. So I went to sleep that night with a pretty comfortable feeling. President Madsen came in the next day, and after I told him the experience I had, he brought back an experience told by Harold B. Lee in April conference of 1973. And this was in May, I think, of 1973. President Harold B. Lee said, "I was suffering from an ulcer condition that was becoming worse and worse. We had been touring a mission. My wife Joan and I were impressed the next morning that we should get home as quickly as possible. On the way across the country, we were sitting in the forward section of the airplane. Some of our church members were in the next section. As we approached a certain point en route, someone laid his hands upon my head. I looked up. I could see no one. That happened again before we arrived home, again with the same experience. Who it was, by what means, or what medium, I may never know, except I knew that I came a few hours later to know I needed most desperately. As soon as we arrived home, my wife very anxiously called the doctor. He called me and to come to the phone, and he asked me how I was. I said, well, I am very tired. I think I will be all right. But shortly thereafter, there came massive hemorrhages, which, had they occurred while we were in flight, I wouldn't be here talking about it. President Madsen read that to me, and we talked about that for a while. And also during the first week, President Madsen tried to get a hold of my parents to let them know I was sick, and he had a hard time getting hold of them. And so all they knew is that I'd gone into the hospital with appendicitis, and they finally decided they needed to find out what was going on. And so my mom found the hospital number and called, and the nurse come and told me I had a phone call, and that Saturday was the first time after Monday that I was able to get out of bed and walk to the phone. And I talked to my parents and told them I was fine. I spent a month in the hospital, and at one point LeGrand Richards came up to visit with me. And the day before he came to visit with me, President Madsen talked to me about him coming and suggested that he was an apostle and that I asked him to give me a blessing so that I could get well and get out of the hospital. So I thought about that a lot, and when I saw President Madsen and LeGrand Richards coming up through the ward up toward where I was, I had the strong feeling that I wasn't to ask him to give me a blessing. So while he was visiting with me, President Madsen was standing behind him, and President Madsen kept mouthing and urging me to ask him to give me a blessing, and I just kind of ignored it. And while LeGrand Richards, member of the Quorum of 12, visited with me. He told me that I was just supposed to be sick, that take my time getting well, that the Lord had more for me to do, and I was just supposed to be sick. He said that missionary work was important, that my health was more important, that I was just to take it easy, and that the Lord had more for me to do. I was in the hospital a total of a month, and I was not getting better, and I just couldn't stay in the hospital anymore, and the doctor let me go, and I was picked up by the mission assistants, and I spent the next month or so just being in the mission office with not any particular assignment to do, but yet still feeling that like there was something I was supposed to do. At one point, I was walking on a Saturday. I walked in. This was the Saturday before President Madsen was released the following Monday. I walked in the mission office, and as I walked past President Madsen's office door, he called me in his office, and he asked me if I felt like traveling, and I said sure. I didn't. I wasn't feeling very good. I couldn't hardly even walk. But I said, what do you want me to do? And he says, I want you to go to Exmouth and to see if you can get Brother Sharman baptized. And I kind of, well, what do you want me to do? And he opened up the scriptures where Nephi was going back to get the plates. And he said, I was led by the Spirit, not knowing beforehand the things which I should do. And he said, that's what I want you to do. So I got on the train and went to Exmouth. When I got at the train station, Elder Merrill, who was the district leader there, picked me up, and I went back to their apartment. I was pretty tired by then, and I had to sleep for a couple of hours. At about 7 o'clock, we went to the Sharman's home and knocked on the door. Sister Sharman answered the door, and she was very surprised to see me. As I walked in the door, I had a feeling that everything was going to be all right. After visiting with the Sharmans for a while, and I had a letter that was to Sister Sharman, but also a little bit to Brother Sharman from President Madsen, I handed them the letter, and they read it. And we talked for a while about being baptized, and Brother Sharman finally said he needed to be baptized, and I asked him when, and he said, well, how about a week from tomorrow? And I had him read the letter again, which really didn't say a whole lot, but he says, I think I need to be baptized tomorrow. So we made the arrangements and to go to the Plymouth, to the Stake Center, and to baptize Brother Sharman. Brother Sharman was ill at the time, and I had to help him into the font, and then by the time I had baptized him, I was pretty drained, and he had to help me out of the font. I was anxious. That was Sunday night, and I was anxious to go back to the mission home on Mondays to be there with the change of mission presidents. But I felt I needed to stay there another week to visit with Brother Glover, and his wife had come home, and his daughter, and so we spent the week teaching them. I finally went back to the mission home the following Saturday. And the next week or so, after visiting with the doctor, I went back and told President Knapp at the time that I needed to go home. When I left England, I had a 12-hour non-stop flight from London to L.A., but the plane was late leaving, and 12 hours later, when we arrived in Los Angeles, I had a short period of time to catch my connecting flight to Phoenix. I got home late at night on Phoenix, and I remember because I came home, when I flew over to England, I remember thinking, I'm not going to come home early unless I'm about sick or die. Well, that's exactly what happened. I remember seeing my family again, and I think there was more changes in me than there was my family. All the experiences I had, I was still pretty weak and pretty thin, and it was really nice to see my family again. I was in the hospital by 7 o'clock the next morning and spent the next month in the hospital. I was operated on and had to clean up some real serious gangrene problems, and I had some real serious operations and recovery for the next month and a half. I finally was reassigned to the Portland, Oregon mission, which included Boise, Idaho at the time, and I spent the first 6 weeks in Pendleton, and then I finished my mission in Boise with Elder Terry. Elder Terry had known a family the year before that lived in Meridian, and at one point he called and talked to Ann Harris, the mother, and she invited us to come out to their house for family home evening. Since it was out of our area, Elder Terry called the zone leaders and got permission for us to go out there. None of this I knew at the time. He just told us one evening, Monday evening, we were going to go out to visit a family. So we drove out to Star, and as I walked in the door, there was a young woman standing in the kitchen. And the first time I saw her, I knew that I was going to marry her. I probably made the family nervous because I practically stared at her all evening. And Eileen was getting ready to leave, and our car was blocking hers, so I went out to move it, and we stood out on the front porch of their house and visited for a while. And the whole time I was visiting, I knew I was going to marry her. And she had mentioned that she was going the end of December, 1st of January, to a cousin's wedding down in Arizona, in Scottsdale, and I told her that's about the time I was going to get released. And anyway, we moved the car and she went home, and then we went home. And after Elder Terry and I got home, I knew I was going to marry her, but yet I wasn't the kind of missionary to really want to break mission rules, and so I was up and down praying all night what I should do. And at about 5 o'clock in the morning, I got this impression to call her, get her address, and just write to her. She lived in Nampa, and I was in Boise. So at 5 o'clock in the morning, I found her phone number, and the conversation was pretty much verbatim. Hello, I said, hello, this is Elder Willis. And she said, oh, and I says, I just wondered if I could get your address so I could write you. And she says, yes, and she gave it to me, and so I said, thank you, and hung up. And rewrote a little bit, and there was one point when I knew I was going to be coming back shortly after I was released and be getting married and having wedding receptions, so I thought I'd better mention to President Eberhard what was going on so he wouldn't wonder when all that happened. And I went in and told him, and I didn't know that the elder just before me was having serious girl problems. Well, I told him that I'd met the girl I was going to marry, and he got rather upset with me and said that you can't pray about something like that in the mission field and get an answer. And so I didn't say anything to him, and he asked me, have I kissed her? And I said no. He says, have you hugged her? I said no. Have you held her hand? I said no. He said, is you sure you haven't kissed her? I said no. And he said, well, how do you know you're going to marry her? And I didn't say anything because he already told me I couldn't pray about it and get an answer. Well, I had. I left the mission field the end of December, and Eileen and her sister and my family were at the airport, and that was on a Friday. And I got released Saturday morning. We got engaged about Saturday at 1 o'clock, and then we went on our first date that evening. I want to read a couple of letters that I received from Brother and Sister Sharman. The first letter, though, is a letter that Brother Sharman wrote to Brother Muse, who was from Washington, Walla Walla, Washington, and he got to know the Sharmans, and Brother Sharman wrote him a letter. And this letter is dated the 18th of July, 1973. He says, "You may be surprised to receive a letter from me, but after your kindness in leaving me the 3-in-1 book and writing inside that I should ponder the contents, I feel I should write and give you the good news, and at the same time tell you something of the events that led up to it. You will be pleased to know that I was baptized on July 1st by Elder Willis. I would like you to know that how good I feel inside since my baptism. I now have a peace of mind and I've never before had, and all the turmoil of these past few months has left me. I would like you to know that I have a strong testimony of prayer. I prayed for Elder Willis to return and baptize me, and by various means he came. As you may recall, Elder Willis left Exeter Branch and went to Cheltenham. While there, he was taken very ill with appendicitis. About the same time, on May 20th, we as a family went to a conference at Plymouth, and President Madsen was one of the speakers, and he touched on the experience of Elder Willis. As President Madsen said, he was visiting Elder Willis in the hospital. I went out of my way to meet him and ask him to take our best wishes to Elder Willis, saying how much he meant to us as a family. I had quite a lengthy talk and left him with a wonderful spiritual feeling. Elder Willis remained quite ill, and I began to feel I had been let down. You might say my faith was slipping, but I started to pray harder that he might be saved. I find this hard to explain, but I just feel something within me that he would one day return. Eventually, he came out of the hospital and returned to the mission home. He wrote to thank us for our concern and our prayers, and letters and phone calls, and he said he was still very weak. I still had prayed, inquiring if the church was true, and was Elder Willis the one who would, or would another elder bring me into the church? Then on June 29th, I awoke with a sore throat and the beginnings of the flu. The next day, June 30th, it was going great guns, and I felt terrible. By the time in the evening, it was raging, but all that day I felt something was going to happen. At 7:30 came a knock on the door. My wife answered it, and in walked Elder Willis. From that moment on, I knew it was all true. He had been called by President Madsen that morning and asked how he felt, and asked if he would undertake a mission to bring a letter to me. He, of course, came. That letter was one of the most beautiful I'd ever received, and was truly inspiring. And I knew that everything was going to be all right. We made the arrangements to baptize me the next day, Sunday, July 1st. And, of course, still stricken with the flu, but I had a blessing in the morning, went into sacrament meeting, and then to Plymouth for baptism at 5 o'clock. Elder Willis had to help me into the water, and I had to help him out. But with God's help, we made it. After all, a blessing and a baptism all in the same day is not too bad. Briefly, then, that's how it all came about. Some of the things I cannot explain. Events just happened that drew me to a wonderful conclusion. Elder Willis has this week returned home to Mesa, Arizona, as he is still not fully recovered, and the missionary committee felt it in the best interest to have him fully recovered back with his family. I'm going to stop his letter there, and I want to read a letter that he wrote to me, and then a letter that Mary Sharman wrote. This is a letter dated July 6, 1973, from Ted Sharman. Elder Willis, I pen these few lines to express my appreciation to you for all you have done for us as a family, and particularly all you have done for me. You appeared at my doorstep on Saturday evening. You appearing at my doorstep on Saturday evening was an answer to all my prayers, and my testimony will always be to the power of prayer to our Father in heaven. I prayed for help in seeking out the truth, and you returned to baptize me. When you were taken ill, I was stricken, and for a moment in time, I felt I had been let down. But by continued prayer and fasting, we all turned the tide in your favor. I felt very humble at the time to think that a non-church member's prayers could carry such weight, and this, I believe, was the start of my testimony. I truly believe God works in mysterious ways to bring us to the truth. It came to me through you and President Madsen. Elder Willis, now I know the truth, and I am a happy man. I have a wonderful feeling of calm and peace within me. All those weeks of doubt and turmoil have gone, and I have this feeling of warmth within me at all times. I read the Book of Mormon. I read the Book of Enos and Joseph Smith too a couple of days ago, and I almost feel like I could write the Book of Sharman to add to their belief in prayer. I feel I must thank you for that tiring journey you undertook to bring President Madsen's letter and then on to Plymouth for the baptism. Another truly great experience, and one I shall always remember. Since that time, I have this feeling of belonging. You know what I mean. I would appreciate if you would forward me President Madsen's address, as I would like to express my thoughts. Elder Merrill called this afternoon and said that you had called the previous evening to say goodbye before returning to Bristol. We had only gone out for about 15 minutes, and we were sorry we missed you. But we shall meet again, I pray, and I know prayer works. We all pray daily for you, your speedy return to health, and you will always have a special place in our thoughts. And thank God for sending you to me. God bless you, your friend and brother, Edward Sharman. Then I want to read a short letter from Mary Sharman, dated the 6th of July, 1973. Elder Willis, sorry we missed you last night, but we shall see you again soon. We hope to have another fireside here soon with a Mission Home film, so maybe you will be able to come down then. Well, I guess you know how happy we are and grateful to you for all. Although you say it wasn't anything you did, you must remember that it was the way you bore your testimony and looked as if you cared so much for me to know the truth of these things that I prayed with a real wish to know. If you had not cared so much, I would not have bothered. We thank our Heavenly Father for you every day of our lives, and it had to be you to baptize Ted, and our Father knew this and answered his prayers. It was great seeing you again, as you will always be a part of our family a very special part, for we have a special love and a pure love that cannot be defined on this earth for you. Right when you can, please take care of yourself and get well soon. Mary Sharman. The next time I saw the Sharmans, Eileen and I went to Idaho Falls. Their son was getting married in the Idaho Falls Temple, and the next time I saw them was in the Idaho Falls Temple. John Sharman's son right now is on a mission in Japan, and the picture. This is a picture of Sharman family at a marriage of Louise's daughter. The experiences I had on my mission, I can say, have had an effect on my whole life. Heavenly Father guided and directed me to a wonderful woman that I've been married to for 40 years. I have a strong testimony of the gospel. I can truly say, as President Hinckley said a few years ago, I have been around a long time. I have seen and experienced much. The wonderful thing is that all that is good that has happened to me has resulted from my service as a missionary. And I can truly say the same thing. I have a strong testimony of the gospel. I know that the Father and Son appeared to the prophet Joseph Smith. I know that the Book of Mormon is true. I know that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has the priesthood of God and the power to seal things both on earth and in heaven. The experiences of my mission gave me a foundation for the rest of my life, and I thank my Father in heaven for the blessings that I have, for the people that I've met, and for the experiences that I have had. I truly had a wonderful experience as a missionary, and I wouldn't trade them for anything in the world. And I say this in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.